This presentation is to go over your needs assessment and your needs assessment outline. Your needs assessment outline is done first, but it's covered second in this presentation. The reason is I want to get you to understand what a needs assessment does so that you understand why you're doing the outline and how it can help you. So a needs assessment has a purpose. The purpose of it is to provide background information about the problem and the population and to provide data to show that this is actually a problem that needs to be addressed. It's like a report that you might write, and it overall shows a support for the need for this program. So the reason you do, the why and how you do it is you need to define the problem using national data. You're going to use reliable sources. You're using secondary data, which means the data were already collected by someone else, and all the data that you're gathering should support your grant's goals. So what it actually does is it defines the problem using national data. You will talk about whatever the disease or condition is that's the problem identified in your grant. You're going to talk about prevalence, which are new cases. You're going to talk about prevalence, incidence, morbidity, and mortality at the national level. You're also going to talk about what the risk factors are, and you've started to identify those risk factors in your logic models. If there are programs that exist, you'll talk about those if you have found them. If not, that's okay. You can talk about them later. And you're going to talk about your population. And then you're going to take the risk factors and apply them to your population. So that's what the needs assessment actually is. And you use these types of sources. Many of these organizations have links on our course webpage in the library source. So the needs assessment will identify grant goals, describe the population, describe the problem, and show that there's a need for it. But before you do the needs assessment paper, you have to do the needs assessment outline, and the outline is supposed to help you write your paper, just like the annotated bibliographies. So you'll have your annotated bibliographies. You will take those to help you write your outline. So the very first thing on needs assessment outline is to list sources, just like you did for annotated bibliographies. I want you to list every source you're using in this outline so that I can see it and possibly read it. So once you list all the sources you're using in the outline, you will then list the problem and the generalized population. So the problem is given to you in the grant, and you have that in your logic model. And the generalized population could be by age. It might be youth or elders or adults. It could be somebody between 25 and 40. The grant actually tells you what it is. It could be rural versus urban. It could be different sexes, different sexual orientations or identities. So once you list those items, once you list the problem and the generalized population, you're then going to start to list risk factors. So this shows you what the first risk factor could look like. You list the risk factor, and so it looks like this risk factor is age or sex. That's what it looks like based on what's below. All you do is list the risk factor. You then will use in-text citation APA format here, and then you will say what is in this. And this comes from your annotated bibliographies, hopefully. So in this chart on page 3, it shows this. The author indicates something about age. So it talks a little bit about what you can find and where you can find it. And that's important so you're not going through all the articles as you're writing your paper. The goal is that you use this outline for that. There's 5 places to list sources here. You might have 1, you might have 6, you might have 3. Just use as many as you need to use. Then you have risk factor B. You do the same thing. List the risk factor, could be poverty, and then you're going to use APA in-text citation format here, and you're going to explain what that source says. You're going to repeat this so that you have 5 risk factors, which is A, B, C, D, and E. You're starting with 5 risk factors because sometimes during the class you lose a couple risk factors, and you need to have at least 3 risk factors to write your needs assessment paper. So you're starting with 5, and then we'll tweak it as we go through the semester. People at this point in the semester say, well, what if I don't have any information on my risk factor? What if your risk factor is poverty and you don't have any articles on poverty yet? Then you would write, I don't have any articles on poverty yet. And that lets me know that you don't have it versus you just didn't do it. If you're having trouble finding something, you should write, I'm having trouble finding sources on this risk factor. Because then that lets me know that I need to try to give you some guidance on where to go. So this is an outline. It's going to help you write your needs assessment paper. However, it is not complete at this time because we've only been in class a few weeks. So as I'm looking at your needs assessment outline in your paper, I realize that it might not be complete, and that's okay, but it needs to show that you have done some work on it. You should not have you should not have 5 risk factors, and for every risk factor say, I don't have any sources for this, because that means you haven't done any work. So 1 or 2 of your 5 might not have any sources. Also, you might use a source more than one. So one source might talk about poverty, race, and age. And so you might use it 3 different times. Or you might have a risk factor that only has 1 source. Another risk factor might have 3 sources. So this is to help you get organized to write that needs assessment paper. We will talk about the needs assessment paper in more detail, but right now I want you to think about how you're going to use your logic model to identify risk factors, and then how you can use your annotated bibliographies to help you complete the outline. So that wraps up pretty much this lecture. You're using your annotated bibliographies, logic model, readings, and notes to help you write your outline. And then you'll get your outline back, and it will help you write your needs assessment. Thanks for listening. This will be recorded in class also, so you'll be able to watch it 2 different places. So if you have questions, first you can see if your answers are in the lecture, and if not, make sure you ask.